All right, I want to welcome all of you who have joined our webinar today on careers in the early education division. Next slide, please. I'm Stephen Profiter. I'm the director of the early education division at CDE. Today, we will be going over some information about the early education division, some careers available within the division, and how to apply for a position within the division. I want to emphasize that the purpose of this webinar is to provide information for how to apply for positions. As we've experienced over the years, and I myself have been in the division for about 4 years, the hiring process may not be clear to some folks. So what we're hoping is that this webinar provides some clarity in that space and helps folks with kind of navigating, the application process and understanding how to get on, how to be eligible for state service. So. With that, I'm thrilled to share that we are joined. The Early Education Division team is joined by our colleagues in the Human Resources Division, and I'm going to hand over to Sushil Chandra from CDE's HR division for an introduction.
Hello, welcome everybody. This is Sushil Chandra from the Human Resources Division. I've been with the CDE for 30 years. Actually, this year was 30 years. And I've been in the Human Resources Division working in HR for about 8 years. So I'm excited that we're here today, and hopefully we can have some of you join our team. Welcome.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sushil. And we're also joined today by some folks that you may or may not know from CDE, but who are instrumental to our hiring and personnel practices, including Nikki Nicnia, Veronica Saturn, Ben Lewis, and Brittany Lehman from our Administration and Fiscal Services Office, as well as Adeline Guzman. So I'm so happy that we've got this partnership across divisions in support of this webinar, and we have the Q&A or the question and answer feature is open, I believe, and we'll be also fielding questions at the end of the webinar as they come up. All right, next. Oh, perfect. You took us to the next slide. Thank you, Brittany. As I mentioned on the last slide, our agenda includes information on the division, some of the benefits of employment in the state of California, some of the classifications that we have in our early education division, 5 steps to a state job, some resources, and then some questions and answers. Next slide. So just to kind of provide a little level setting for who our division is. I'm sure if you've joined our other webinars, you probably know all about what we do. But the vision and mission are a critical part of of our work, and the personnel in our division who work towards support these principles. These principles kind of guide decisions that we make when we advertise and we're hiring, in addition to other state kind of requirements around state positions. So I'll just read them here. The Early Education Division vision. Those words are a little too similar, I think, for my tongue at 2:00 on a Wednesday. But our vision is that all of California's children have a strong early learning and care foundation that supports the whole child and school and lifelong success. Our mission is to lead in an innovative, inclusive, and high-performing early learning and care system by advancing equitable opportunities that optimize thriving children, families, and communities. And as I mentioned, these are critical to, they're foundational to our division, and they're part of what we look at, and a part of what informs our hiring and our recruiting is staffing that supports that vision and that mission. Next slide. And also kind of another foundational piece to our division's work. If you've been on our division webinars, this graphic should look very familiar to you. We've included here because, like I said, it's foundational to our work. It's what we do, and the individuals in our division work to implement the state's vision for universal pre-kindergarten. So, but just abundance of caution, if you haven't seen this before, I'll review the slide. So UPK stands for Universal Pre-Kindergarten, and by 2526, a universal option will exist for all 4-year-old children in California. So, and when we say universal, we want to emphasize that while there are many programs that make up universal pre-kindergarten, it's transitional kindergarten that will be universally funded in 2526. But what we see UPK as a mixed delivery system that brings together different programs from across early learning and TK-12, and also includes California State Preschool Program, which is one of the other programs that our division oversees, along with other pre-kindergarten programs, which we do not oversee, but that serve 3 and 4-year-old children, such as the Federal Head Start program and other subsidized programs that operate a preschool learning experience and are operated by community-based organizations, as well as family child care, private preschool, and the Expanded Learning Opportunities Program. And universal means that by 2526, regardless of background, race, zip code, immigration status, or income level, every child will have access to a quality learning experience the year before kindergarten. Next slide. And actually, I think I'm going to hand off to my colleague Veronica. Next couple slides.
Good afternoon. Next slides, we're going to go over state of California employment, including the benefits first. So benefits for the state of California include a range of benefits for state employees and their families, including health care, which includes health, dental, and vision insurance, health reimbursement accounts, disability insurance. There is leave available, and there's a wide range of paid leave that is available for its employees. And the state also offers saving options and retirement options that include CalPERS, CalSTRS, and Savings Plus. For the next section, the California Department of Education telework program supports the CDE's overall objective to promote high-performing and a diverse workforce. The early education division positions that can be effectively performed remotely are eligible for participation in the CDE telework program. We want us to note that the early education division is headquartered in Sacramento, and telework eligible applicants must reside in California at the start and duration of employment. The next slide goes over the classifications that are employed within the early education division. And we want to highlight specific classifications that are current and upcoming recruitments. So items that have an asterisk on them are positions we are currently recruiting for and will be recruiting for in the very near future. So these include the Child Development Assistant and Consultant classification, Child Nutrition Consultant, Education Program Assistant/Consultant positions, Education Administrator 1, Education Research and Evaluation Assistant/Consultant, Research Data Analyst, including 1 and 2, the Research Data Specialist 2 and 3, Staff Service Managers 1 and 2, Student Assistant and Graduate Student Assistant, Office Technician Typings, and then Staff Service Analyst and Associate Governmental Program Analyst. Next, Susha will be going over 5 steps to a career with the California Department of Education.
Thanks, Veronica. Okay, 5 steps to a career with CDE. If any of you have ever attempted to get on with the state of California or applied for a position with the civil service system, You know, it can be a little bit cumbersome and confusing. So hopefully we can help you navigate through that as we do our presentation today. Sorry, can you go to the next? Perfect, thank you. So 5 steps to a career at CDE, reviewing classification specifications and minimum qualifications, determine fit and eligibility. This allows you to figure out what you qualify for, what positions are going to, you know, correctly match your skill set and your education experience. The second step is to kind of create a CalCareers account. This allows you to be available, see positions that meet your criteria or classifications that you specifically select. It's a great way to navigate through the application and interview process as well. And then step 3 is completing the corresponding examination or assessment. If you've taken an exam, then you know it can be a bit lengthy, but we're going to talk a little bit about what that entails. And then step 4, applying for an open position, how to do that and successfully get selected. And then step 5, interviewing for a position. So let's talk about step 1, classification specifications. I strongly encourage all of you to review the class specs, you know, to help you determine what you're eligible for, what's a good fit for you, what your education and your experience, what classifications they meet. So a classification specification is basically a job description that defines the classification. It outlines the minimum qualifications, also referred to as the MQs, and it describes typical tasks that you would be expected to complete as an individual, you know, in that classification. The MQs are an outline of the minimum education and experience needed to qualify for a position. So today we're going to talk a little bit about, you know, what those MQs look like and how to ensure that your education, your experience is accurately, you know, reviewed. Can we go to the next one? Thanks. Step 2 is creating a CalCareers account. I encourage all of you to do this. You don't have to have a CalCareers account to apply for a state job, but it is beneficial to do so. You can submit your application electronically. It also allows you to save your application and any supporting documents that you're required to provide with your application, such as your transcripts, your credentials, your degrees. Those things can be stored in the system, which is nice because then you don't have to keep, you know, looking for them and uploading them every time you want to apply for a job. And it's just easily a click of a button versus, you know, typing a whole email out. It also allows you to take online examinations. So if you ever want to take an online examination, you absolutely have to create a CalCareers account to do so. So I'm also going to show you how to create a CalCareers account. We're going to go over the steps rather quickly, but you'll have these slides to refer back to later when you try to create a CalCareers account. So we're not going to actually do that today, but we're just going to show you the screenshots and kind of show you how to navigate in there when you're trying to create one. So when you're creating a CalCareers account, you're going to go to the, you know, CalCareers website and create account login. It's going to look, this page will look similar to this. There might be a different graphic, but, you know, it'll look something similar to this. You'll click on, so you'll see these 3 buttons underneath the search bar, which is the advanced job search, geographic job search, and exam and assessment search. If you click the exam and assessment search, it'll allow you to kind of take a small assessment and figure out where you kind of land in terms of classifications. So when you're on this page, you're going to click account login. And then here, it'll take you to this page, and then you'll click create account button. I think I'm with Stephen. I'm having a little bit of difficulty on a Wednesday afternoon after lunch. Maybe I should have got a Starbucks before we started. Okay, so you'll click Create Account button, which will take you to the account login page, which will look similar to this. This page is how you create your CalCareers account. You'll notice you're entering all your private information in, your email. Your email is what's going to be used when departments, receive your application. They're going to use your email to kind of correspond with you. They might send you an interview invitation through your email. They may send you you'll get your exam results through your email account. So there's, definitely benefits to setting up this account and using it to navigate the hiring process and the exam process, really. Can we go to the next? Okay, so once you create your account, this is what it's going to look like. And I specifically put this page in here because I wanted you guys to see the menu bar to the left of the screen and all the features it has. Remember, I talked about, how you could save your documents in there. You can upload documents and save them in there. So like your degrees and your credentials and your transcripts, you can save in there so you don't have to, go collecting them every time you apply for a job. You can also set up a job application template. So every time you apply for a job, you can just access that. You don't have to fill out the complete application every single time. You can also copy your application and create a new application in case you want to update it, at a later time. So there's a lot of benefits to having this. So you can also see on the left-hand side, if you go down to the second to the last menu bar, there's an exam section. So you can the exams that you apply for, you apply directly through the system. And it also records everything and also keeps all your exam results all in one spot. So you have everything, that's easy to access. See the email section and the message section right below. That allows you to correspond with any department contact that's contacting you regarding an exam or regarding a job position. So for example, when you're taking a CDE specific exam, if you're taking a CDE exam, our exams office may contact you and send you an email and tell you, hey, you didn't meet the minimum qualifications, but we're going to allow you to submit additional information. So that's why it's really important to kind of have this account created. So you have the ease of accessing and getting messages almost instantaneously versus through the mail. Okay, perfect. So step 3 is taking examinations for the state. I just talked a little bit briefly about that. But before applying for a state job, you kind of have to take an exam and pass the exam for the classification that you want to be considered for employment. So today's webinar is all about the Child Development Division, the Child Development Consultant position, and the Early Education Division. And so we're focusing on positions that are specifically related to this particular division, but you can take exams that are CDE specific through this process, or you can take exams that are open, that are statewide and open to, all classification levels. You can submit an application for a specific position that you're interested for, but it doesn't automatically enter you into the examination. And the tricky thing to remember about applying for the state of California. So whether you apply for a job with the state of California, or if you're applying to take an exam with the state of California, you're actually filling out the same standard 678, which is the same. It's the job state application form. So it sounds a little confusing. This is, I think, what is part of the confusion with the public who's never applied for a state job, because you're in essence filling out the same application for both getting the job and being hired, as well as applying for the exam. So it gets a little tricky and confusing. So be mindful of what you're, applying for. You have to first take an exam before you can apply for a job. Sorry, go to the next. Yep. So examination bulletins include details of the class specs and the MQs. I talked both about what those were earlier, but it also includes the salary range and the steps that are required to take the exam. If you, oftentimes the exam bulletins are lengthy. Sometimes they're multiple pages. I think the longest one I've seen has been 9 pages. But all of that is useful information. And if you carefully read the exam bulletin and scroll, read all the way to the bottom, you'll see all the details and all the instructions on how to take the exam, what the proper things to look for, and also includes minimum qualification requirements in there as well. And it also includes references to the class specs. The examination bulletins for CDE, specifically for CDE positions, for CDE examinations, can be found on the CDE and CalCareers website. It's a little bit easier to navigate through with the CDE website, but we'll give you links for the CalCareers website and on how to access our CDE exams through the CalCareers website as well. And I think they might be throwing them in the chat if I'm not mistaken. Veronica, can you give us a thumbs up on that? Oh, okay. Well, we're just going to assume that they are. And examination, oh, there we go. Examination information is also linked on every job bulletin. So even if you can't find the exam bulletin, if you're looking at a job bulletin that you're interested in applying for, the exam information is always included at the bottom of the job bulletin. Next. So everybody, all candidates must meet the minimum qualifications to participate in an exam. This is absolutely required. It levels the playing field for everybody when their exams being scored. We don't allow you to participate in the exam if you don't meet MQs. In fact, you'll probably get a letter either in the mail or through your CalCareers account letting you know that you didn't meet the MQs. But if you do get a letter like that, we do give you the opportunity to provide supplemental information that can be considered to, allow you into the exam. So if you do get a correspondence or a communication like that, that's allowing you to provide supplemental information, I encourage you to do it, because that's the only way we're going to be able to, take into account that whatever additional information you want us to consider to allow you to participate in the exam. Application transcripts, degrees are used to determine MQs. It's important to make sure that you're providing a clear picture of your education, and your experience. You can't assume that we know what, someone with your title does. So it's really important that you actually focus on, including all the details of that job description. So how you complete the state application is very critical in determining MQs. Next. So I added this because I really wanted to talk about what we look at, when you're submitting your application and how we determine that you meet MQs. In addition to, the degrees and the transcripts that you provide, we look at how you complete the application, because we want to make sure that your application, supports or demonstrates what your supporting documentation states. So it's very critical that you complete this completely. If you miss stuff, if there's gaps, if there's holes, we can't consider it, because a job application, if like any other job application, when you're filling out an application, there's a certification that you sign at the bottom. So whatever we consider has to be included on this application for us to actually determine whether you meet MQs. We can't consider things that are outside of the application or not mentioned in the application that are attached to supporting documentation. So while you're still submitting your credentials and your transcripts and your degrees as supporting documentation, that's just basically confirming or validating the information that you actually put on your job application. So the education section that you're completing has to be complete. Make sure you're including your units, make sure you're including, what your degree's in. If you have a master's, If you have credentials, make sure you're filling out those sections. And if you have any appropriate licenses or certificates, that you're including those on here. So critical sections of the state application, I kind of wanted to bring this section all to your attention as well. This is the experience part of completing the application. So the slide that we just covered was all based on education. This is all based on your experience. So how we determine you meet MQs is what you put in this section with regards to experience. So the dates that you include in here are very critical, right? That's how we determine how many years or how much time you've spent in a job application or how much experience you have. The total hours per week, that tells us if you've worked full time or not worked full time. And it also helps in determining if we have a requirement for you to have 3 years of teaching experience, then this is how we use the section, the information in this section, the dates, the hours per week, the total worked, to determine whether you meet the requirement for 3 years of teaching experience. The duties performed, well, that's what entails what your experience is. That's what you're going to talk about, specific duties. Oftentimes what we see is people copy and paste things. I've seen people copy and paste a mission, somebody's mission or the purpose of their job, the purpose of their title. That doesn't tell us what duties you're actually performing. So what we really want to see here is what you do, so I'm a manager. I oversee, 3 offices. I want to tell them how many people are under me, how many people directly report to me, how many people, what I do. If you, develop curriculum and you approve curriculum, then you want to list that, because we don't know. We can't make assumptions that you do that. I strongly encourage you to go, when you're writing your duties, that you're taking a look at the class specs and the MQs and making sure that, you're meeting the MQs with the experience part, and making sure that your experience, we can clearly see that your experience meets the MQs based on what you're stating in here. A lot of times we see people only writing 1 to 2 sentences and not enough information for us to determine that. So make sure that you're doing a thorough job in completing this section. So step 3, applying for an examination. I encourage you to always follow the instructions on the exam bulletin. The exam bulletin is very detailed. And I know sometimes it's lengthy and you just don't want to read the whole thing, but it's got a ton of information on there, and it tells you how to appropriately apply for the exam without being disqualified, because we want to make sure that you don't get disqualified. Hence why we're all here today, right? To ensure that you guys are successful in applying for both the exams and jobs at CDE. So make sure that you're reading the exam bulletin and the job bulletin. They both include critical information. There's also, contact information. If you have questions about the exams, you can always email CDE and ask questions. We're always going to try to refer you back to the exam bulletin. So that's why I'm really telling you to read the exam bulletin before you, ask a question, but we're happy to take questions on if you have any. And then submitting the documentation as stated on the exam bulletin. There's multiple ways you can apply for a job. The easiest and quickest way is the email, is going through CalCareers and emailing not going through CalCareers, emailing CDE exams, your application and your documents. You can also drop off to the CDE lobby. There's a locked lockbox down there. So even if you left it there, nobody has access to that, your personal information. It's actually secured in a lockbox. Or you can also physically mail your application to the CDE examinations office. I'm not going to read the address. Okay. So things to kind of remember, I actually kind of stated all of this, but I want to go over it again so you guys have a clear understanding. So applying for the exam requires you to complete the state application, which is the same application that you complete when you apply for a job. I know it sounds confusing and it sounds a little, it just sounds crazy, to be honest, doing the same thing for two different processes, but, you know, not our CDE process, so we're following the state rules, but you do have to fill out the state application, the same application to apply for the exam as well as applying for the job, which was why I kind of encourage you to create the CalCareers account so you can have your state application saved in there so you're not having to retype it multiple times. The state application is reviewed and is used to determine MQs. So make sure you're doing a thorough job in completing that state application and that you're completing all of the sections. Any blank sections will automatically be disqualified and we won't even contact you to say, hey, you missed a section. You just won't you'll be told that you're disqualified for an incomplete application. All of the instructions for an exam are listed on the exam bulletin, so make sure that you're reading the entire bulletin to determine, you know, whether you can apply for the exam or not. Incomplete applications for anything, for an exam or a job, will not be considered or entered into the exam. When filling out the standard 678, do not include a social security number. We don't need that. You can include your ECOS ID if you'd like. And that's about it. You don't need to include a social. Late applications will not be accepted into the current administration of the exam. Instead, they'll be bumped to the next administration of the examination. So be mindful of that when you're applying. Applying for open positions. I know I've said this multiple times and I sound like a broken record, but you'll have to fill out the same standard 678 job application form to apply for open positions. Open positions are posted to the CalCareers website, and they're also included on CDE's website. To be honest, it's easier to get to through the CDE's website than it is the CalCareers website, because the CalCareers website hosts every department's open positions, whereas CDE only has CDE's open positions on there. So use the advanced job search to narrow down positions by department and classification if you are in the CalCareers website. If you're in the CDE website, it's so much easier. You're just looking at what CDE has available. But each job posting includes a section of desirable qualifications. Desirable qualifications are not necessarily required, but we do use those to kind of screen out applications. So the desirable qualifications are not necessarily so specific to the classification itself, but they are specific to the position that you're applying for. So a lot of times hiring managers will list things that they're looking for, things that will be useful for their position specifically. So be mindful of that when you're, you know, applying for the open positions that you're really trying to get at least an interview for. Next. So step 4, the application package. Once you filled out your application package, now it's time to kind of fill out your application, sorry. Now it's time to package everything and send everything through. A lot of times you'll notice on the job bulletin, there is the instructions on how to submit it. And sometimes the instructions will include a statement of qualifications that's required. The statement of qualifications will give you specific instructions. They usually have customized questions to answer. A lot of times, applicants do not answer the questions. Instead, they'll give us a general resume attached. They'll just write up a general paragraph about their qualifications. And what we're looking for here is that you're answering the questions that we're specifically asking. They have to meet the requirements of the SOQ instructions. You know, so if they say, you know, 12 font and no longer than 2 pages in length, and there's 6 questions, then we expect you to answer all 6 questions. You know, and SOQ questions range anywhere from 1 to 2, 1 to 6, you know, writing prompts. So it could be a combination of items. Additional items that you can include is a resume, a cover letter, and transcripts. Again, all of these items support what you already wrote in your application. So make sure if you're including, transcripts, that your transcript information is also included in the education portion of the application. Completed applications for all required documents must be signed and must be received by the final filing date to be considered. If you've submitted a late application when you're applying for a job, we won't consider it. Matter of fact, we won't even release it. The Human Resources Division won't even release it to the hiring manager if it's late. It will be considered late. But that's the benefit of having a CalCareers account, because you can easily click the button and submit it, and you have until 11:59 p.m. that day, the date that it's due. Even though the job bulletin says by 5 p.m., if you're submitting it electronically through CalCareers, you technically have till 11:59 p.m. to submit that job application. Next. So completing the state application for employment, your state application should be current, complete, and demonstrate how you meet the MQs and desirable qualifications for the position. I kind of talked a little bit about the desirable qualifications. The desirable qualifications are kind of position specific. So it's items that the hiring manager would like to see or needs for that position. But they don't necessarily mean that you have to meet it to qualify for that position. It's nice to have those. You'll get screened. You might get extra points during screening, but it doesn't mean that you don't meet the MQs for that classification title if you don't have the desirable qualifications. It just gives you a leg up. Applications that refer to a resume or cover letter, instead of filling out the application, will not be accepted. So in other words, if in the experience section or the duties performed, you say, please see resume for details, that can't be considered. We can only consider the information that's actually listed on the state application. So all of the sections of the application must be completed. Next. So applying, some things to kind of remember. I really wanted to include this just so you have reference of things that we often see come up pretty regularly that applicants forget to do. Is make sure that you're including all of the relevant employment history, including detailed job descriptions, hours worked per week, and the start and end dates. We use that information to determine how long you have been in a position and how long you have had the experience that you've had, especially when we're determining MQs, when we're considering you for the examination process. We want to make sure that you're actually qualified to, up for that classification, for the class specs, and that you meet the class specs. So make sure that you're really completing the section, as thoroughly as possible. We don't assume that we know, what a teacher does, what a teacher assistant does. We know the basics, right? But we need you to tell us what your duties are as a teacher, what your duties are as a teacher assistant. And I just happened to, those two popped in my head, but it's any classification. Anybody who meets the MQs can apply for a job, not just teachers. So I just a little disclaimer. An application cannot be modified or revised once it's been submitted. Make sure that there's no errors and that you didn't forget anything, right? Make sure you've attached everything that you need to attach. The transcripts and credentials sometimes are required documents that we ask for. So go back to the job posting bulletin, because that job posting bulletin or the exam bulletin will tell you what supporting documents are absolutely required. Applications that refer to a resume or cover letter instead of filling out the application will not be accepted. Did I read that twice? I did. Okay, sorry, I read that one twice. Next. So statement of qualifications, I kind of talked a little bit about this. a statement of qualification is a writing prompt that addresses, the position's desirable qualifications. It also allows us to kind of see how you write, how you organize your thoughts. It also, a well-written SOQ addresses the questions, addresses the writing prompts, and follows the instructions or the requirements of the SOQ itself, So it is, if we tell you it can't exceed more than 1 page in length and it has to be 12, Arial 12 font, then, we want you to do that. It tells us how well you, follow instructions too. So, so we're definitely looking for something that specifically addresses our SOQ. If an SOQ is required and is not submitted, the application is considered incomplete and will not move forward in the hiring process. So some tips for filling out your SOQ or statement of qualifications is making sure that you follow the instructions for the SOQ. I think I've said this multiple times, but I just want to make sure that I point out the important things, so making sure that you're following the instructions specifically to the font, the size, the number of pages, and that you're addressing the writing prompts, appropriately. So if there's, multiple parts to a question or to a writing prompt, that you're answering, each parts, separately and specifically, and that you're labeling it appropriately. Clearly define your experience and how it aligns with the duty statement, and give specific examples that demonstrate your qualifications, that supports what you're saying. And it should, a SOQ should support the information that's already on your application. In other words, we shouldn't be surprised by anything you write in your SOQ after reading your application. So interviewing, almost all of CDE follows this interview style. It's usually in 2 parts. Not almost, all of CDE does. This is kind of a requirement. But we have a panel interview. The state requires a diverse panel interview. So there's usually anywhere from 2 to 4 panel members that'll interview the candidate. It can be in person or virtual interviews completed over Zoom. But it also requires a writing exercise, a timed writing exercise that often takes place after the panel interview. This allows us to kind of see your skill set, your writing skill set, and your management of time as well. So I'll turn it back over to Veronica and Stephen.
Thank you, Sushil. Thank you very much. The state exam and kind of hiring process is multifaceted. So really appreciate you walking us through that. And we've received a number of questions during the presentation, and we'll take some of them live. But I know that I think there's one that that we're hoping you might be able to take, but we'll take some of the others before we do that. So you've got time to review. I see a hand that's been up for a little while. Is it I don't know if we're able to unmute Anna or Anna. Oh, don't see her hand anymore, or their hand anymore. Okay. Well, we could proceed with some of the questions that have come in nonetheless. And I think we'll start with there's actually a couple of questions we received about the job positions and whether they're located in Sacramento. So I think we mentioned at the top that we have a telework. The state of California has a telework policy, and CDE has one as well. I'll say that generally our positions are headquartered in Sacramento, like the term headquarters. So, but we have a number of staff that naturally, since we've had this remote work and telework option, that we have folks that live outside of Sacramento, and it works just fine. We've got folks from Riverside and LA and But the headquartered location is typically Sacramento, and what that means, as far as, for the couple of times that somebody who's located outside of Sacramento, if you have to travel to Sacramento, say for a meeting, you're kind of traveling on your dime, so to speak. It's a distinction between just that's specific to where the headquartered location is. And so Sheil, I did my best with that one, because I know we've got a couple of folks in our division that are headquartered, but I don't know if you've got anything that you would add to that.
Nope, that's perfect. Just to kind of remember, while we currently offer telework, it's not necessarily something that we can guarantee for life. So keep that in mind. And that we are headquartered in Sacramento. All our positions are based in Sacramento, or most of our positions are based out of Sacramento, especially in the early education unit. All of them are based in Sacramento. So any travel that's required when you're required to come here, it would be on your own dime. We can't reimburse you for that.
Awesome. Thank you, Sushil. There was a question that came up early on in the presentation, and I'm wondering, Sushil, if you want to answer this one or if you want to take it back and we can follow up. But the question is, how do you determine when a person is not fit for the position, though they have all of the qualifications and experiences? And I think this kind of gets at like the minimum qualifications piece that you were going over, and kind of the importance of how you're completing the application.
So the MQs are designed, the class specs are designed for anyone in mind, and any like it's a way to level the playing field for people who come from a big district, or people who come from a small district or a small county versus a big county, because we know that the comparisons between the two are greatly different, right? So the class specs allows us to kind of level the playing field between anybody who has all these different experiences or comes from whether they come from a big organization or a small organization. Everybody has to meet the minimum qualifications. That levels the playing field. It doesn't matter where you come from, you just have to meet the minimum qualifications. So if you're not able to meet the minimum qualifications, it's probably not a good fit for you, But don't discount, if you're looking at the child development consultant position, don't discount the one position that's below it, which is the child development assistant position. That one, you don't have to have a credential to get in. It allows you to get your foot in the door, but you can also apply for an analyst position, which also allows you to get your foot in the door and then kind of feel out if it's something that if this is the path you want to go, if you want to stick with CDE, or if you want to, have a career in early education. So, just be mindful of that. But you have to make sure that you meet the MQs for any specific position that you're applying for.
Awesome. Thanks. Thank you, Sushil. A couple of other ones here that looks like Ben is responding to the government shutdown question, so that question will be answered here shortly. You should be able to see the Q&A and the answered section once that's completed if you're interested. I see another question. Why does it take so long for my application to get seen? This looks like it's a position specific question. And I know that what I'll say is that sometimes for some of our positions, it depends on if you've kind of met like the minimum qualifications and your application has been passed through. So, but I could speak maybe from a program office, and then maybe
I can take it. Yeah, I can take it. Yeah. So when you're applying for a position, when you apply for a position, before we release the applications to the hiring manager or to the program office, like for example, Stephen's division, we redact any confidential information from your application, and we have to do that manually. So we review your application manually, we redact anything confidential. There's like certain criteria that we go by, and then all that information is redacted before it's released. So somebody who is not, shouldn't have access to confidential information doesn't have access to it. So it's to protect, it's for your own protection. But we also review your application when you're applying for a job and making sure that it meets the MQs. So, we're taking another look at it and making sure that it addresses the desirable qualifications. It doesn't have to, but we like to notate when it does. So we do read your SOQ. We make sure you answer the questions. We make sure you've attached everything that you're required to attach. So there's a review process that takes place, So when you apply for the job, it doesn't go directly to the hiring manager. It goes through to the Human Resources Division where it's assigned to somebody and somebody reviews it before it's released to the program office. When you're applying for an exam, your application is reviewed before you're accepted into the exam.
Awesome. Thank you, Sushil. Looking at some of the other questions we have, we've got one that's got 5 upvotes, and I wonder, Sushil, if you want to take this one. And it is the salary negotiable or standard based on what is listed on the job posting?
That's a great question. So when you're coming new into the civil service, into state civil service, we're required to offer you the base salary, and it's at the bottom of the range, right? So basically when you see a job posting and it has a range of $10,000 to $12,000, 10,000 being the base, the bottom of the salary range, you're coming in at that base. Unless we do have a process to request hiring above minimum, which the minimum would be in this case, in this example, $10,000. You can come in at a higher request, as long as you meet the criteria for hiring above the minimum. There's like 11 different components you have to meet in order to, it's either 9 or 11 different components that you have to meet before we can award you a hiring above minimum, also referred to as a HAM. But the hiring manager actually has to put in the request. So necessarily you don't request. We'll send you a job offer letter telling you, hey, we're offering you this position, the child development consultant position at $10,000 a month. Are you interested? And then you have the right to, say no. And if you say no, we're going to ask you why. And then you say, well, I'm wondering if I can get, request a HAM or I request a higher salary or negotiate a higher salary. And then we return that and we start the conversation with the hiring manager and the program office to see what we can do. But you have to meet all the requirements for the hiring above minimum. And some of the requirements, I'm just going to tell you because I know them, is you have to have extraordinary qualifications that stand out, amongst the entire candidate pool. So you have to have something that nobody else does in order to be considered. So that's one of the things. The other thing is, that your position had to have been difficult to recruit. So in other words, we had to have had some issues trying to recruit an individual for this position. There could be, it's an extraordinary classification or a rare classification where we don't get a lot of people that's on the list. But when there's a list of 100 people on the list, then that's not necessarily always considered, a difficult position to recruit.
Thank you,
I don't have
Sushil.
the chat open, so I'm letting you. Sorry, I cut myself off. Letting you read the questions that you want me to answer.
You got it. You got it. We will funnel them to you. Let's see here. There's one question, Sushil. I don't know, like I don't have the answer. I don't know if you do. It seems like maybe it might be a Cal HR might have the answer. So it's what if you are a person with learning disabilities? Is there someone that can help me fill out my Cal careers? I don't know what assistance is available through that.
Yeah, you're right. It is Cal HR. Through Cal Careers, there's a whole section on how to get on with the state if you have if you need assistance. there's a section in the Cal Careers. If you go to the Cal Careers section, there's a whole program. It's called the LEAP program that we run that will also help you get on with the state. It also has a different probationary period. It looks a little different than a regular probationary period. It's easier to kind of go through that process too, to get on.
Thanks, Sushil. I think that we've got two more questions. I think one we could probably resolve in the chat. And so I'll ask my team, or maybe we could share like the the link to the CDE, jobs at page that Sushil mentioned earlier. Somebody was asking about the job openings that we're currently looking for. And then the other question I see here, if someone has not passed the examination for the child development consultant, is there a waiting period for one to try again? And I thought there was, thought it was like a year, but I'm off the top of my head, I'm not sure.
So if you applied for an examination, you weren't allowed into the examination, then you can apply for the next administration and see if you qualify to get into the next administration. If you've taken the exam and you didn't rank and you passed, right, but you didn't rank high enough, then you can then you can't take it again for a year. Addie, jump in if that's incorrect or if I forgot anything.
That is correct, Sushil. If an applicant didn't pass the exam, they're required to wait the 12 months before they can retake it. And if an applicant does not meet the minimum qualification requirements, they can reapply once they earned or possess the required experience or education, and there's no waiting period for that.
Perfect. Thank you, Addie.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Sushil and Addie. Looks like we got another question in the chat here. A couple of them, actually. We could probably follow up in perfect. Looks like Nikki's got the email address question. And then is there a process so here's another question that may be for you, Sushil. Is there a process for waiving requirements as far as not having held the prerequisite position? And I'm not sure that
there isn't necessarily a waiving of requirements, but there are multiple for every classification that we demonstrate listed in the exam bulletin. In the class spec, sorry. In the classification specifications, there's always two patterns that you can meet to meet the requirements. One is solely based on, you having like for the child development assistant, one pattern for the child to meet the child development consultant MQs is to be a child development assistant for, in range B for a year. Then you meet the qualifications for, automatically for a child development consultant with range B for the experience part. If you don't have that, you can also come in as a child development consultant, meeting the pattern 2 requirement for the experience. So there's always two patterns. So when you're looking at the class specifications, look at both patterns to see what pattern you meet, your education and requirements meet.
Thank you, Sushil. And I think that's our last open question. I don't see any hands. Okay, perfect. And yes, this is kind of more a comment. I just entered the child development consultant on the Cal Careers website, and it said no jobs posted. That's very possibly very true at the moment. This is, the purpose of our webinar was really to kind of inform and to kind of create this resource for folks to apply to get on the list. In the event that a position does come open, if they're interested in doing that. whether it's through attrition or through positions we may get in the budget, throughout the year, um, there are different opportunities to apply for a position in the division or in the department, whether it's a consultant position, and that could be a child development consultant, it could be an education program consultant, it could be an education research and evaluation consultant, it could be an analyst, any number of our analyst positions. So um, uh, yeah, I'd say that if you're interested, it behooves you to get on the list, and to kind of take that quarterly, that opportunity to take the quarterly exam, when you're ready. And then, are there any ways to prepare for the exam? Um, I think the um, I think a couple of thoughts, and Sushil, I don't know if you have anything to add to this, but the job announcement, I think, going back to what Sushil said earlier, the job announcement has a lot of information about the position. Now, I know this is like you're talking about the exam. Um, the exam is something that is, so actually I'll go back and I'll talk about the exam. The exam is, I mean, it's published on the CDE website, right? So it's an experience questionnaire. So the preparation for the exam, I'd say, is probably to review it, and kind of think about your experience that you have that relates to the different questions that are in there. Um,
And
and
make
yeah,
sure, and I'm just going to tag team Stephen, make sure that you're being thorough in that, in that assessment, because it's, we can't assume anything. We don't want to assume anything. It's not fair to anybody to assume anything. So make sure that you are being thorough when you're, filling out your application, when you're filling out that exam, that questionnaire, that you're being thorough and complete, because that's often where people miss the mark, is they, leave out information. They're like, well, my resume said it, but we can't consider the resume. We can only consider the application, the information that's on the application, and the information that's on that questionnaire when we're looking for an exam. Addie, do you want to add anything to any tips or tricks that you can add on the exam portion of the QAQ?
Yes. So one question that I get a lot over the phone or email is what when do I take the exam? I think maybe there's confusion in that. So the exam consists of all the documents required for the examination packet. So that's going to be that STD 678 form that Sushil explained in the beginning. The questionnaire, the qualifications assessment questionnaire, that's the exam. And that's available to everyone as a PDF file, so you can review that before you submit it. And then just make sure that you do submit all those required documents. So like if you have a credential, submit a copy of that, your transcripts, your diploma, and just be as descriptive as possible with your duties performed, and make sure that the dates are correct and updated. Sometimes, they're not as detailed, so it's a little bit hard for us to determine the length of experience that you've had in that job that you're adding into your application.
Thank you, Addie.
and I think as somebody who's reviewing applications for an analyst position in my office, I can't emphasize that enough, because when I look at an application that has one sentence in there that is very high level, it's hard for me to, we have to score applications, so it's hard for me to assess, what
Yeah,
this means when you don't have like kind of the discrete descriptions of tasks and things like that.
right. It's very difficult for us to, determine what experience you have when you just only write a sentence and it's very high level, like Stephen mentioned, because it's just not enough information. It's not detailed enough for us to determine anything. So make sure, and oftentimes some of our CDE staff, recruit individuals, and they'll be, you have working relationships, and they'll let you know, hey, we have an opening. I think you're going to be perfect for it. don't assume that they can influence anything over here because they can't. So make sure that you're, your own advocate and that you're selling yourself on that application, and that QAQ document.
So, all right. Well, I'm not seeing any more open questions. So I think we can go ahead and bring ourselves to a close here. We'll be sending out slides, materials after the webinar. It'll come from our UPK mailbox. And before we sign off, I want to give special thanks to Sushil and Addie for joining us from the HR division and answering so many questions, being so helpful. And of course, my team, Veronica, Nikki, Ben, and Brittany for getting us set up here. And of course, you for your time. And just really want to thank you for your engagement and your questions, and wishing you a wonderful rest of your day and week. If you're in Northern California, hopefully you'll stay dry. It's a little rainy and windy out there. And be safe, be well. We'll talk soon.